Y'all remember the WWE in 2016? The year where AJ Styles finally made his WWE debut, Goldberg came back to the WWE, and even Triple H won a Royal Rumble. Whatever you think about 2016, whether it was good or bad, there is no debate that Summer of 16 was just so much fun. This was the peak of WWE's product in 2016, and everything afterwards was great too. It was fresh, it was appealing, and it made you crave so much more. After an up and down start to 2016, WWE announced that in the summer, they'd be bringing the brand split back. Raw and Smackdown would each have exclusive rosters, and Smackdown would now air live on Tuesdays. Vince gave the keys to the shows to his kids. Stephanie had Raw, and Shane was going to be the commissioner of the newly named SmackDown Live. And when they picked their GMs, they didn't disappoint. It was Stephanie who had brought in Mick Foley, and now it was time for Shane to top that. And what did we get? Daniel Bryan. We had Daniel Bryan back in the WWE after he had to retire because of injury, and now SmackDown was his show to run. Now it was time for the draft. Raw versus SmackDown, and picks from NXT would be made too. And the rosters drafted were a breath of fresh air. SmackDown took AJ, Cena, Randy, Wyatt, Ambrose. On the Raw side, you had Rollins, Sasha Banks, Roman Reigns, and coming up from NXT was Finn Balor. There would be no time to wait. Battleground was coming up, and it was a triple threat match between Reigns, Ambrose, and Rollins. 2 from Raw, 1 from SmackDown. Where would the WWE Championship land? Everything was reset. Raw had enemies open up the show, and I don't care what anyone says, but that song got me so hyped. Y'all remember when Papa Roach would open up Raw in our day and we'd get hyped? This song wasn't no Papa Roach, but it brought back the gritty feel of Raw. And we had new stages, new graphics, and a new feel. It was a new look for a new time. Now, it was midsummer and time to start the journey to Summerslam, and man, we had no idea how ridiculous this Summerslam was gonna be. Heading into the show, I don't even know where to start. We gotta start with AJ Styles and John Cena, the face of the WWE versus the face that runs the place. These two's rivalry was outstanding. It was something wrestling fans had wanted to see for such a long time. AJ finally made his debut in 2016, and it became a reality. When the club came down, it looked like they were ready to attack both Cena and Styles. But as the club approached the ring, Styles turned his body towards Cena and he laid him out. Styles clocked Cena square in the face, and Styles and the club beat him down. Beat Up John Cena was born then and there, and a match of Money in the Bank was made. The match banged like we all knew it would, but the win for Styles had an asterisk beside it. Gallows and Anderson helped him win. The question was, would we see a rematch? The answer to that is yeah. Both AJ Styles and John Cena got drafted to the same show, and this rivalry was about to heat up even more. After both of them failed to earn an opportunity for the WWE Championship, they put their focus back on one another. These two wanted to prove who the superior one was. It was as simple as that. So AJ laid out the challenge. He wanted AJ Styles versus John Cena one more time, but he wanted it at SummerSlam. Cena accepted, and the question now was who was the face of SmackDown. Week in, week out, these two would just spit absolute fire on the mic. They made everything feel so real. It didn't feel like you were watching a scripted program. It felt like you were watching two dudes who simply didn't like one another, out to prove that they were superior to the other. They would do anything to take each other down. The biggest party of the summer would only heat up with these two going to war. Things in the main event title picture were pretty fresh too. After Seth Rollins went first overall in the draft, SmackDown countered with Dean Ambrose, who was the WWE champion at the time. He'd finally gotten out of the shadow of Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins, and it was his time to shine. Once he got drafted to SmackDown, he ended up beating his former Shield brothers in a triple threat match at Battleground, so the WWE Championship was headed to the supposed B show. On the first episode of SmackDown, they determined the fate of that very championship. Dolph Ziggler, John Cena, AJ Styles, Bray Wyatt, Baron Corbin, and Apollo Crews in a 6-pack challenge. The winner advancing to SummerSlam to face Dean Ambrose, and Ziggler would come up the victor. Finally, we had something fresh in the WWE title scene, and it wasn't the same revolving door of people. For Ziggler, this was about proving that he was the best. The title reigns before weren't a fluke, and he really was that guy. He was a top tier star. It was time for him to shut everyone up and reach the pinnacle of WWE and win his first WWE Championship. Whenever Ambrose would challenge Ziggler's skill in the ring, he'd deliver, and he was ready to silence the doubters. The way he would make you buy into whatever he was saying was amazing. This was the magic that Smackdown encapsulated in 2016. Everything just flowed so well, and when the people who were in the feud were called upon to deliver, they did just that, and they did it in spades. Elsewhere, new guys like Apollo Crews were contending for the IC title. Truly, Smackdown was living up to their name, the land of opportunity. The women were showcased each week too. Becky Lynch was ready to take the show over, Alexa Bliss and Carmella had just been drafted from NXT, and veterans like Naomi and Natalya were out to prove that they could still go in the ring. Smackdown was just on fire. Then there was Monday Night Raw. Let's start off with the first episode of Raw after the brand split. Like I mentioned, Ambrose took the WWE Championship to SmackDown. Stephanie was annoyed that she let her brother beat her and run away with the WWE's richest prize. So it was time to make a change, and a new title was coming to Raw. At SummerSlam, Raw would crown their first ever Universal Champion, a championship for the people. Mick Foley and Stephanie McMahon said there would be 2 fatal 4-way matches. The winner of those 2 matches would meet at the end of the night, and the winner of that match would meet their number 1 overall pick, Seth Rollins, at SummerSlam for the Universal Championship. In the final at the end of the night was Roman Reigns, the former WWE Champion, against the new kid on the block, Finn Balor. It was a coup de grace to the chest that sent Finn Balor to SummerSlam. It was his time to shine. SummerSlam was going to be an epic collision between Finn Balor and Seth Rollins. Another massive match was added to the SummerSlam card. Who would walk out of SummerSlam 2016 as the first ever Universal Champion? From here, Seth and Finn kept it simple. Finn had a demon persona to him, a side Seth Rollins feared. It was that fear that led Seth Rollins in search of the Demon King. He wanted to summon the Demon King, because after all Finn Balor was a ripoff of Seth Rollins. Rollins was the first overall pick. Rollins was the first NXT champion, and Finn just copied whatever he did. But the question was, who would walk out of SummerSlam the first ever Universal Champion? Finn Balor was coming to Brooklyn, and he was bringing the Demon King with him. From the Demon King, we go to the King of Suplexes. What would be Brock Lesnar's fate at SummerSlam? Raw had taken the Beast Incarnate, and he was scheduled to compete at SummerSlam after WWE granted him a one-off in UFC. WWE answered this question pretty quick and made a mega match between Brock Lesnar and the returning Randy Orton. It was simply labeled 15 years in the making. The 2 stars who came from the legendary OVW class 15 years later would go up against one another simply to prove who was the best. This match was simple. It was going to be a fight. It was Brock Lesnar's F5 versus the most destructive move in all of sports entertainment, the RKO. When Orton came back at Battleground, he said it only takes 1 RKO to lay people to rest. And that would be exactly what he's going to do to Brock Lesnar at SummerSlam. He even said no enhancement was needed, referring to Brock's failed drug test. Paul Heyman didn't agree so much. He said that Randy would never ever hit an RKO on Brock Lesnar, and out came Randy Orton to do the unthinkable, and of course he hit an RKO on Lesnar. The next night on SmackDown, Lesnar returned the favor by invading SmackDown, and the stage was set. It was about as even as it could get. But who was gonna walk out of SummerSlam with their hand held high? The same night as the Universal title was announced, the women of Raw wouldn't be left out. Charlotte was the sole women's champion and had brought the women's title to Monday nights. The night before, she had been submitted by her mortal enemy, Sasha Banks. And on the first Raw after the brand split, Charlotte would defend her title against the woman who seemingly had her number. It was Charlotte versus Sasha Banks, 2 of the pillars for the women's evolution, to battle it out once again. The match was back and forth, and Sasha even took a page out of Eddie Guerrero's playbook to get Dana Brooke tossed out of the match. And with Sasha on the mat, Charlotte looks down, tells her she would never beat her. Sasha locks in the Banks statement, and the childhood dream comes true for Sasha Banks. She was now the WWE Women's Champion. The division was hers, and no one could take it away from her. But Charlotte still had her rematch clause, which she invoked at SummerSlam. Over the coming weeks, she just wouldn't go away. Sasha would drop lines on Charlotte saying that if it wasn't for a one-night stand, Charlotte wouldn't be there. Interwoven in all of this was Chris Jericho confronting Enzo, which would lead to a mixed tag team match. Charlotte and Jericho versus Sasha and Enzo. Enzo had Cass, but for Jericho, who would back him? Well, when you're in doubt, you look to your country. A Canadian who you could rely upon. Kevin Owens. The friendship we never knew we wanted, but we definitely needed. These two organically put together such a memorable team, and their first test was going to be Enzo and Cass at Summerslam. Speaking of tag teams, these two weren't the only teams wanting to make a statement. We had the tag team champions drafted over to Raw. Big E, Xavier Woods, and Kofi Kingston, the New Day, the most positive team in wrestling history. AJ Styles was over on Smackdown, so it was time for Gallows and Anderson to run on their own and prove that they were a great act without AJ. Their first act of business was the New Day. They didn't want any of the power of positivity. They simply wanted to pull these guys leg first into the steel post and give them ring post-itis, a new, severely traumatizing disease which is extremely difficult to recover from. It was Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gallows who were the cure for this. The secret ingredient to the problem was the Raw Tag Team Championships. The question was, would the cure be found at SummerSlam? Since Raw was 3 hours long, they had 3 picks to SmackDown's 2, which led to a larger roster. On this roster were Cesaro and Sheamus, who were hell-bent on destroying each other. So if they wanted to destroy each other, they could. That would be in a best of 7 series that Mick Foley set up. Everyone had something to do, and then there was Roman Reigns, who had lost his opportunity to challenge for the brand new Universal Championship. So he set his eyes on Rusev's United States title, and he crashed their wedding celebration, the most classic and useless WWE trope. So at SummerSlam, it was going to be Roman versus Rusev for the United States title. Things were just exciting going into SummerSlam 2016, and most of the matches had a purpose. Everything had a story. There was a reason for you to invest in. Raw was doing their thing, and SmackDown was doing theirs. Say whatever you want, but the theme song was a banger too. Anytime rap music is used for WWE, I'm all for it. And then you had the star-studded card. John Cena, AJ Styles, Randy Orton, Brock Lesnar, Balor, Rollins, Banks, Charlotte, Reigns, the list goes on and on. There was so much star power on this show. We had the best of 7 match on the pre-show, which was a banger, but now it was time to start things off for real. The SummerSlam promo package hit, and it got me all types of hyped up for the show. There was a feeling in the air, and you knew you were about to see something special. We kicked things off with the tag team match. The supposed hometown boys, Enzo and Cass, came out to a raucous reception, and the Brooklyn crowd biting at their every move. Then out came the Canadians, Kevin Owens and Chris Jericho. It was time to kick off SummerSlam, and this tag team match was great. They went back and forth, and KO and Jericho did such a great job at putting the faces over. They had you caring for Enzo when he was on the mat. But babyface power wouldn't be enough, as Kevin and Jericho got the best of Enzo and Cass. Now it was time for the women to display their skills. Sasha Banks, the women's champion, against her enemy since their NXT days, Charlotte. This match was back and forth, with each countering the other's move. Charlotte would go for a natural selection, but it wouldn't work. And then she'd go for it again, and Sasha would counter it into a bank statement. But no, Charlotte still wouldn't tap. These two had the crowd loving every moment of this match, and they had us all on the edge of our seats. Who would win this match? And then Sasha Banks goes for one final bank statement. Charlotte shifts her weight over. The new WWE Women's Champion was Charlotte Flair. These two delivered an amazing match. We knew about their capabilities, and this match only further proved their skills. Now, Raw had 2 matches. It was SmackDown's time to shine. Well, Apollo vs. The Miz was solid. There was one thing we really cared about. There were 2 generation-defining performers here to tear the house down. Face that runs the place, John Cena, and the man who was here to take his spot, AJ Styles. AJ Styles versus John Cena. It was time. After weeks of calling each other out, weeks of claiming they were the best in WWE, weeks of physicality, it was time to lay it all on the line. First, it was AJ Styles who came out, then it was John Cena. Both guys go back and forth, and nothing is given. They countered everything the other guy would throw at them. Cena using his power and raw strength, and AJ countering with his quickness and agility. And they were busting out the big moves in this match. Early on, we saw a Styles clash to John Cena, then an AA to Styles, but no, they wouldn't quit. Cena would counter the phenomenal forearm into an STF, Styles went into the calf crusher, Cena still wouldn't tap. We still didn't have a winner. Then Cena went for a super AA off the second rope, but Styles still wouldn't quit. It was back and forth with the crowd biting at every moment, and the fans were going wild. Everyone loved this match. The two had delivered. But we still didn't have a winner until Styles catches Cena for one more Styles clash. He doesn't go for the pin, he goes to the ropes and he hits one more phenomenal forearm. The ref's hand hits for 3. AJ Styles had beaten John Cena once again. He was now 2-0 against the top dog in WWE. Styles leaves the ring and we cut to a shot of John Cena sitting in the middle, despondent after his loss. He takes off his armband and leaves it in the middle of the ring. He marches up the ramp and the question was, what was happening? Was Cena leaving the WWE? It led our heads to turn and capped off an amazing match perfectly. After this, we wouldn't find a cure for ring post-itis, but Big E came back and the New Day retained via DQ. We were halfway through the show and now it was time for the richest prize in sports entertainment to be defended. After weeks of telling us he was gonna do what he set out to do, could Dolph Ziggler finally overcome Dean Ambrose and win his first WWE Championship? A back and forth match with each guy digging deep into their bag of tricks, and just when you thought Ziggler had the match sealed and delivered, Ambrose would kick out. Just when you thought Ambrose had retained, Ziggler kept soldiering on, until one final dirty deeds put an end to Ziggler's hopes. He was that one-hit wonder. He was the one who couldn't win the big one when the opportunity was big. He choked it. So the question remains, what was Dolph Ziggler's future after coming up short? Man, we had so many amazing matches and moments through the night, but it was time to cool down a little bit before the Universal title match. And that's when Nikki Bella came back and the team of her, Natalya and Alexa Bliss beat Carmella, Naomi and Becky Lynch. It was nice to see a return on Summerslam. What more can I say? Now, it was another star-studded match. Finn Balor versus Seth Rollins for the Universal Championship. What was this new belt gonna look like? What respect would it pay to WWE's past? And what the hell was this thing? This wasn't what we were expecting. This wasn't what we thought the Universal title would look like. The crowd booed this title out of the building. We had been waiting for a new title, a new design, but you give us that? You give us the WWE title, but you made it ketchup colored. That's what they had been hyping us up for, was this thing. This thing looked brutal, man, and it still does. I'm not even gonna get into it. The Brooklyn crowd booed so loud, they hated this thing. Thankfully, the saving grace was the match. Seth Rollins and Finn Balor, two of the best talents in the entire world. After weeks of Finn Balor playing mind games with Rollins, it was time for the Demon to take over Brooklyn. Finn made his entrance as the Demon King and he was ready to release it with the crowd loving the sight. These two went back and forth and back and forth. Yeah, the title was garbage, but the match was anything from it. They would try to hit their big moves, but the other would have a counter for it. They kept up such a fast pace and delivered moves from deep in their arsenal. Seth Rollins powerbombed Finn into the barricade and you knew something was wrong. His shoulder had dislocated, but he soldiered on until he goes up to the top rope and hits a coup de grace with an injured shoulder. Finn Balor became the new face of Raw. It was finally time for someone new to take the mantle in WWE. He picked up the ketchup title and celebrated with the crowd basking in the glory of the first ever Universal Champion. Next, it was Rusev scheduled to defend the US title against Reigns, but before the match, these two had a brawl and the match was called off. And now it was time for the main event of the show, Brock Lesnar and Randy Orton. 15 years in the making, and sure, these two had fought before, but nothing like this. These two started the match off, and this was a all-out brawl. They fought on the outside. Lesnar threw Orton off the barricade and through the announce table, but Orton did what he said he was gonna do. He had hit an RKO. The only problem was they were outside the ring, so they had to get back in, and Orton knew he had to dig deep to beat this guy. He was going for the punt. He was ready to kick Lesnar's head off, but Lesnar reversed it into an F5, but Orton kicked out. Brock wasn't having any of this, and off came the gloves. He busted Randy Orton open, and he laid there in a pool of his own blood. The match finished with a TKO, and Lesnar was the winner. Even after the match, he kept going to town on Orton, until Shane McMahon came out and ate an F5, and we ended SummerSlam 2016 with so many questions. What a show this was from top to bottom. The show was star-studded. The show had returns, happy moments, sad moments. This abomination was revealed, and at the end of the night, whether you watched the pay-per-view or you were in attendance live, you left happy. Sure, Battleground happened after the draft, but this was the first true pay-per-view after the brand split, and it delivered in spades. It was an amazing night. The aftermath of Summer 16 led to a ton of fun too, and we can't ignore that. Unfortunately, we gotta start on a bit of a sad note. After Finn got injured, he had to vacate the title the next day, and this sucked because it stunned all his momentum. But since he was no longer champion, a new opportunity arose for Kevin Owens. Owens would win the Universal Championship, and now his and Jericho's friendship would flourish. They would entertain us week in, week out. Jericho had his list gimmick, and the crowd loved it. Elsewhere on Raw, Sasha and Charlotte continued their heated feud with some first time ever matches, and continued to prove just how good they were. Roman's push was cooled a little bit, but he stayed in the US title picture for a bit, which was refreshing. Then on the Smackdown side, I don't even know. Where do I start? It was so good. After Ziggler lost his chance at the WWE Championship, it was time for him to meet a familiar opponent in The Miz. These two put on an incredible feud which was character driven, it was exciting, it was emotional, and it had high stakes. Ziggler even put his career on the line to prove to The Miz that he wasn't a one-hit wonder and he could win the big one. Becky Lynch became the first ever SmackDown Women's Champion, and without her going to SmackDown, the man would have never been born. It's the opportunity she got there which led to future success. And then SmackDown continued to showcase women like Alexa Bliss and Naomi. Bray and Randy had a fun feud, and the cinematics here were really cool. They weren't overdone, and it was really cool to see something appetizing like this. Randy even joined the Wyatt family at one point. And then of course, AJ Styles. The guy who did exactly what he said he was gonna do. SmackDown was his show. SmackDown was the house that AJ Styles built. After SummerSlam, he would go on to contend for the WWE Championship, and not even a year into his WWE career, he won it. It was his time to shine, and shine he did. We got some great matches and moments from him, and it felt nice to see a new guy at the top of the WWE food chain. He'd kill it before Cena would eventually return, and that feud would continue. And how could I forget Survivor Series 2016, one of the greatest 5-on-5 elimination matches ever. It felt like they were actually fighting for brand supremacy. They were there to prove which show was better, and it was a bunch of new faces who were carrying the load. It wasn't the same guys as before. This time was so much fun. Everything from the draft to the new additions to the rosters, the aesthetics, and the rivalries. It was a full reset of the WWE. It was a good time. The summer of 16 was just the beginning of a fun time, and I'd say it stretched till about Wrestlemania 33, where they started to mess with the rosters a little bit too much. It was the last time I remember being entrenched in the product, and when Tuesdays would roll around and you heard Left Us for Dead, you knew you'd be in for 2 hours of fun. You felt like a kid again. Everything made you care about wrestling. 2016 gave us so many amazing matches, moments, and memories. It was simply a fun time to be a WWE fan. It may not have been the peak of my wrestling fandom, but it built itself a very special place in my heart. So that was the video. Thanks for taking a trip back to the summer of 16 with me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know down below in the comments what your favorite moment from 2016 was. Drop a like on the video, and I will see you guys in the next one.